Do you remember Rudy Giuliani being at the White House on election night and into the early hours the next morning?
I do. He was looking to talk to the president, and it was suggested instead that he come talk to several of us.
Was there anyone in that conversation who, in your observation, had too much to drink?
Like Mayor Giuliani. There were suggestions by, I believe it was Mayor Giuliani, to go and declare victory and say that we'd won it outright.
My recommendation was to say that votes were still being counted. It's too early to tell.
And did anybody who was a part of that conversation disagree with your message?
Yes, the president disagreed with that.
At some point in the conversation, Matt Oskowski, who is the lead data person, was brought on. And I remember he delivered to the president pretty blunt terms that he was going to lose.
What did the president say when he called you?
Essentially, he turned the call over to Mr. Eastman, who then proceeded to talk about the importance of the RNC helping the campaign gather these contingent electors in case any of the legal challenges that were ongoing changed the result.
As President Trump and his supporters continued to lose lawsuits, some campaign lawyers became convinced that convening electors in states that Trump lost was no longer appropriate.
I just remember I either replied or called somebody saying, unless we have litigation pending that's like in these states, like I don't think this is appropriate, or this isn't the right thing to do.
Jared, are you aware of instances where Pat Cipollone threatened to resign?
He was always, him and the team were always saying, oh, we're going to resign. We're not going to be here if this happens, if that happens. So I kind of took it up to just be whining, to be honest with you.
I did not see evidence of fraud and that would have affected the outcome of the election.
I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bullshit. I mean, that the claims of fraud were bullshit.
I respect Attorney General Barr, so I accepted what he was saying.
On December 1, 2020, Attorney General Barr said in an interview that the Department of Justice had not found evidence of widespread election fraud sufficient to change the outcome of the election. Ms. Hutchinson, how did the president react to hearing that news?
I left the office and went down to the dining room. There was ketchup dripping down the wall, and there's a shattered porcelain plate on the floor. The valet had articulated that the president was extremely angry at the Attorney General's AP interview and had thrown his lunch against the wall.
On December 4th, 2020, shortly after your meeting with Rudy Giuliani and other allies of President Trump, you released a statement publicly addressing, quote, calls for the legislature to overturn the 2020 certified election results. Why did you believe, as you wrote in this statement, that the rule of law forbid you from doing what President Trump and his allies wanted you to do?
I am not allowed to walk or act beyond my authority.
Ultimately, fake electors did meet on December 14th, 2020 in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, Nevada, and Wisconsin. At the request of the Trump campaign, the electors from these battleground states signed documents falsely asserting that they were the, quote, duly elected electors from their state, and submitted them to the National Archives and to Vice President Pence in his capacity as President of the Senate.
On the evening of December 18, that night, a group showed up at the White House, including Sidney Powell, retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, and former Overstock.com CEO Patrick Byrne.
I was not happy to see the people in the Oval Office. I don't think any of these people were providing the president with good advice.
I'm going to categorically describe it as, you guys are not tough enough. Or maybe I put it another way, you're a bunch of pussies.
As you can see, Ms. Hutchinson reported that the meeting in the West Wing was unhinged. The meeting finally broke up after midnight during the early morning of December 19. Cassidy Hutchinson captured the moment of Mark Meadows escorting Rudy Giuliani off the White House grounds to, quote, make sure he didn't wander back into the mansion. At 1:42 a.m. on December 19, 2020, shortly after the last participants left the unhinged meeting, Trump repeated his big lie and claimed it was, quote, statistically impossible to have lost the 2020 election, before calling for a big protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there, will be wild.
The president's private schedule for December 21st, 2020 shows a private meeting with Republican members of Congress. According to White House visitor logs obtained by the committee, members of Congress present at the White House on December 21st included Congressman Brian Babin, Andy Biggs, Matt Gaetz, Louis Gohmert, Paul Gosar, Andy Harris, Jody Hice, Jim Jordan, and Scott Perry. Then Congresswoman-elect Marjorie Taylor Greene was also there. And we've learned that part of the discussion centered on the role of the vice president during the counting of the electoral votes. These members of Congress were discussing what would later be known as the Eastman theory.
I guess Mr. Gaetz and Mr. Brooks, I know, have both advocated for there to be a blanket pardon for members involved in that meeting, and a handful of other members that weren't at the December 21st meeting. Mr. Biggs did. Mr. Jordan talked about congressional pardons, but he never asked me for one. Mr. Gohmert asked for one as well. Mr. Perry asked for a pardon too. I'm sorry, I need to finish.
Mr. Perry, did he talk to you directly?
Yes, he did.
Did Marjorie Taylor Greene contact you?
No, she didn't contact me about it. I heard that she had asked White House Counsel's Office for a pardon.
And after Barr's resignation on December 23rd, the acting attorney general who replaced him, Jeff Rosen, and the acting deputy, Richard Donahue, told President Trump over and over again that the evidence did not support allegations he was making in public.
On December 27th, you had a 90-minute conversation with the president. You also noted that Mr. Rosen said to Mr. Trump, quote, DOJ can't and won't snap its fingers and change the outcome of the election. How did the president respond to that, sir?
He responded very quickly and said, essentially, that's not what I'm asking you to do. What I'm just asking you to do is just say it was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman.
Do you remember Mr. Giuliani meeting with Mr. Meadows on January 2nd, 2021?
I do. I remember leaning against the doorway and saying, I had an interesting conversation with Rudy, Mark. Sounds like we're going to go to the Capitol. He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, there's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know. Things might get real bad on January 6th.
On January 4th, John Eastman went to the White House to meet with the president and vice president.
I did walk to that meeting, and I did go into the Oval Office with the idea of attending that meeting, and then I ultimately did not attend that meeting.
Why not?
The reasons for that are privilege.
January 5th, the New York Times ran a story about the disagreement between the president and the vice president about whether the vice president could determine the outcome of the election.
The statement says the vice president and I are in total agreement that the vice president has the power to act. Is that incorrect?
We've been through many documents that clarify that this is not where the vice president was.
And based on documents we've received, we understand how that speech devolved into a call to action and a call to fight. President Trump's edits continued into the morning of January 6th. Following his call with Mr. Miller, President Trump inserted for the first time a line in his speech that said, quote, and we will see whether Mike Pence enters history as a truly great and courageous leader. All he has to do is refer the illegally submitted electoral votes back to the states that were given false and fraudulent information where they want to recertify. At 11:20 a.m., President Trump had a phone call with the vice president. During this call, the vice president told the president that he would not attempt to change the outcome of the election.
When I entered the office the second time, he was on the telephone with who I later found out to be was the vice president.
And the word that she relayed to that the president called the vice president, I apologize for being impolite, but do you remember what she said her father called him?
The P word. As you can see in this email, after Vice President Pence told President Trump that he would not unilaterally deliver him a second term in office, the speechwriters were directed to reinsert the Mike Pence lines.
I saw Mr. Cipollone right before I walked out onto West Exec that morning, and Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. we're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen.
He was very concerned about the shot, meaning the photograph that we would get, because the rally space wasn't full. He was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons. But when we were in the offstage announce tent, I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing mags away.
And I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol.
We need 21 priority. We just had protest. East Circle, breach the line. We need backup.
When I returned to the White House, I walked upstairs towards the Chief of Staff's office, and I noticed Mr. Ornato lingering outside of the office. When I went in, he shut the door, and I noticed Bobby Engel, who is the head of Mr. Trump's security detail, sitting in a chair. Tony proceeded to tell me that when the president got in the Beast, he was under the impression from Mr. Meadows that the off-the-record movement to the Capitol was still possible, and when Bobby had relayed to him, we're not. The president had a very angry response to that. The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm. Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel.
As rioters were entering the building, the Secret Service held Vice President Pence in his office right off the Senate chamber for 13 minutes as they worked to clear a safe path to a secure location.
Oh, they can't keep the building. Hold. Turn that door up. If we're moving, we need to move now. Copy. If we lose any more time, we may lose the ability to leave. So if we're going to leave, we need to do it now.
So if President Trump wasn't calling law enforcement or military leaders, what did President Trump spend his time doing that afternoon while he first settled into the dining room? He was calling senators to encourage them to delay or object to the certification.
Pat said something to the effect of, Mark, something needs to be done or people are going to die and the blood's going to be on your effing hands.
Yeah. You're the Commander-in-Chief. You got an assault going on the Capitol of the United States of America. And there's nothing. No call, nothing, zero.
This election is now over. Congress has certified the results. I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?